Good evening, everyone. So we're just going to wait another minute or two just to let the attendees filter in, and then we'll kick off. Thanks to those that are joining. So we're probably going to let it wait till 34, and then we'll kick off just to make sure that everyone who's joining is online. Okay, great. Well, I think the numbers are stabilizing now, so we'll kick off. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's YEP Forum webinar in conversation with Climate Tech. My name is Phil McNally. I'm chair of the YEP Forum and also a research fellow at UCL, focusing on electricity market design. We've got a really exciting lineup tonight, and I'll introduce the panelists shortly. But just to give you an idea of how the event will run, I'll start by giving a bit of background to the YEP Forum, just in case we've got any newbies joining us this evening. And then each of the panelists will take it in turn to talk for 5 minutes or so about their company and their personal career journeys. And then we'll move to an open Q&A session with the audience. So please do pop any questions you've got into the Q&A box. That's the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And I'll do my best to make sure we cover them all before we close up for the evening at around 7:30. So in terms of a quick overview of the YEP Forum, so we're a network for professionals with less than 10 years experience who either work directly in the energy sector or have interests in energy. So we currently have over 2,000 members from more than 350 companies, and we host a range of events across the year, such as webinars like this evening, through to in-person networking events and site visits, which are always a favorite with our members. All our events are free to join, operating on a first come, first served basis. So get yourself signed up to the mailing list. I think a link will go in the chat now. And also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to make sure you don't miss any of the events as they're published. So we host roughly one event per month, although we do have 2 coming up in March. So keep your eyes peeled for invites that will be going out soon to an International Women's Day networking event with Accenture on the 15th of March. And then a really exciting visit to National Grid's control room on the 31st of March at the end of the month. So keep an eye out for those. Okay, so now that the formalities are out of the way, let's just dive straight into the event. So first up, we have Ellen Moller, who is head of Europe at Watershed. Watershed are a really exciting startup that's offering an end-to-end solution to help companies cut their carbon emissions. I won't say much more than that, as Ellen will explain it a lot better than I can. So Ellen, over to you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And happy to be here, and happy to be joining you, Nicola and Matt, on the panel. So thank you, Phil. Maybe just to share a few more words on Watershed and what we do. So we are a technology company that builds science-driven software-based tools to help companies decarbonize. And what that means in practice is everything from helping them sort of deeply measure their full scope 1 through 3. So where is the carbon actually sitting within their business? but even more importantly, sort of what do they do about it? And so we build the kind of software that helps, let's say, a consumer goods company actually simulate where the emissions are upstream and downstream in the products they create and what kind of things they could toggle on and off to reduce that, or provide access, for example, to VPPAs for our customers where they may not be able to access it for sort of highly additional clean power. So that's the kind of shape of the work that we do. We've been around for a few years now, dual headquartered between London and the US and San Francisco. So customers across the world. And my role is really to lead that European business. So based here out of our London office and lead all things related to go-to-market and our customers and our product and strategy throughout the region. It's helpful, Phil, if I say sort of a little bit of how I got here, or is that any detail there? Okay, super. So my journey, which may be a little bit similar to some people who are kind of listening today or will listen to this after, didn't start in climate. I actually spent kind of the first 9-10 years of my career scaling technology businesses. So really kind of coming from the tech sector. And over the kind of the last few years of that, started to kind of look out in the world and sort of see what else was out there and what kinds of problems I really wanted to be able to solve. And was lucky enough to have kind of followed Watershed since its early days, having known some of the great people that had gone there to start the company. And ultimately it came to the point of saying, actually, I really want to go full-fledged into climate. If I want to wake up every day and think about a problem, this is the problem I want to be solving. And how can I apply my skill sets, which may have been in a different industry, to this? And so that's actually what I've done. So I joined the company just over a year ago now and have dived into climate full force with them. But a lot of what we do actually at Watershed is hire people who don't necessarily come from sustainability backgrounds, but are coming to the company to apply their skill sets to help solve problems. So excited to talk more about that. I know that's a bit of the conversation for today. So I'll leave it at that and pass it back to you, Phil.
Perfect. Thanks, Ellen. Really interesting stuff that the company's up to, and I think maybe a modest intro from you there. So just for everyone's reference, Watershed, I think, is one of the most exciting startups out there. You know, it's got backing from some of the biggest VCs in sort of Silicon Valley, and also some household names, Al Gore, Mark Carney, and Cristiano Figueroa is all involved. So really interesting stuff. So next up, we have Matt Illick, who is CEO and co-founder of Greenworks. So Greenworks is a very fresh startup that's aiming to harness EdTech to bridge the net zero skills gap. They've got a mission to get 10 million people into green jobs in 10 years. So I think ambition certainly isn't lacking. So Matt, over to you. Please give us a bit more of an insight into Greenworks and how you came to set it up.
Thanks, Phil. And lots of what Ellen said really resonates, and I'll compensate for my relative junior nature on both the panel and the climate and energy space by taking a bit more time to kind of explain kind of why we're here and what we're trying to do. And as a brief intro into my background, you've got the kind of the bios, but basically I've spent the last 15 years trying to crack really tough social problems and getting huge amounts of purpose from my work. I've been so fortunate to have an awesome career to date, and a lot of it's been majoring on particular aspects of social policy, covering crime, home affairs, and justice. It took me to some of the largest national charities and social enterprises, as well as good fortune of working in Number 10 for a couple of years, which it was an eye-opener even 5 years ago now, and I dread to think what it was like just a few months ago. And this summer, as I was trying to plot what to spend the next decade doing, certainly in the context of all the extreme climate experiences that we sort of had over summer, but also deep inspiration from reading a couple of books, one in particular, Speed and Scale by a guy called John Doerr, which many of you might have read, for the first time made me feel like decarbonization and the net zero transition was a solvable problem. And among the kind of obvious themes of global geopolitical alignment and so on, some of the very practical things were actually supply chain and workforce, and the fact that this transition was going to be happening at different paces and scales. But the core message being, we've got to press the accelerator pedal. We've got to get as many people locked into the challenge as necessary and possible, including everything from the kind of consumer end all the way up to international organizations and governments in between. And then it was a mammoth challenge, but an eminently solvable one. And that gave me huge hope and inspiration. And so the idea for Greenworks was born in June time. And by October time, I was getting ready to go full time and actually getting into the kind of mode of doing our first investment raise. And I can touch on some of the detail that later on, but I really wanted to try and underline what we're trying to do and what the mission is. And so my personal realization, as Ellen, I think also shared, is that climate change is the biggest threat, the biggest challenge there is to work on. It's the most important challenge any of us can be spending our time on. And the next 10 years in particular are crucial for delivering the transition to net zero. But to do it from a workforce perspective, we need something like 30 million green workers by 2030, according to the International Energy Agency, and even more by 2050. And about 90% of these roles are skilled manual trades, what you would have previously called blue collar workers. So charge point installation, heat pump technicians, solar panel and retrofit roles. And it's going to be really, really challenging because the two mega trends are an unprecedented mobilization of capital worldwide. So some $3 trillion currently and due to grow to about 6 by the end of this decade. And at the same time, the workforce in most developed nations diminishing for lots of reasons, one being aging population and low birth rates. And so this green skills emergency is made by these two mega trends, and it's the problem that we're solving at the core of what Greenworks is about. And we're already seeing it as a multi-billion-pound bottleneck. So lots of you who work in energy companies will have seen the Green Homes Grant, and you probably read just yesterday's news about the boiler upgrade scheme for households, where the Lord's Climate Change Committee said that the take-up is so low, the national target of having some 600,000 heat pump installations per year by 2030 is not going to be hit. And one of the reasons for this is there are only 3,000 heat pump installers in the UK compared to some 130,000 registered gas heating engineers. And most of those gas heating engineers are aged 47 and above. So a lot of them will be retiring out of the workforce over the next decade, just at a time when we need lots of heat pumps. So we exist to get 10 million people into these green jobs, as Phil said. We're a brand new EdTech startup tackling this green skills emergency, building the net zero workforce. And we believe that people are the answer to this challenge, whether that is people changing their behavior in their households, but also the people that are going to make that behavioral change possible. And we are trying to major exactly on those roles that involve people using their hands and building that future infrastructure. And we're starting by trying to build a marketplace, activating the worker side at scale, and then connecting them to employers and training providers for opportunities to get them into these sectors. And for talent, a lot of the challenge is about helping them understand and access those green jobs, which are good for their wallets, they're good for their future, with solid starting salaries, but are not well trodden paths, not very well known yet. And for employers and training providers, it's already the labor force that they're desperate for and stands in the way of them accelerating their pipeline of execution. And it's been really interesting tracking countries that are ahead of us, including the US and Germany, where things like consumer solar demand is growing at an exponential rate, and we've already hit the kind of bottlenecks that we're anticipating happening in the UK over the next 2 or 3 years. And our early product focus is obsessed about talent. So we're building an app for people that will help them discover and get matched to green jobs. And it's looking to take them on an end-to-end journey before they even have awareness of what these opportunities are, raising their awareness, providing content, including micro-learning and social content that will help them understand what the opportunity and what the role actually entails, and then removing barriers and frictions to accessing training, including sometimes the open market that will charge you about £3,000 to do an entry-level electrotechnical course. And again, to touch on the US, I think forecast to need something like 1.5 million new electricians as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act between now and 2030. So huge global challenge this. And we're initially targeting younger people because we believe that this emergency can only be tackled if you increase the overall supply of green workers. So it's talent making rather than being a recruiter and talent taking. And so we need people to choose these options just at the time where they're potentially making decisions about their future. But we also trace interest from other segments, which is really interesting. So gig workers that might be in precarious work, sunset workers, so think like boiler engineers that may be close to retirement, but others who aren't close to retirement, who know they need to get on board with heat pumps, partly because they're experiencing consumer demand. And also older workers, actually. Indeed, in one of our early use cases, we have someone who's been in nursing for 30 years and now wants to get into domestic energy assessment. I can tell you more about that later. So effectively, we believe that we can't just upskill the existing workforce. We need to engage and activate new talent for these spaces at a speed and scale probably not seen since the Industrial Revolution. And so old methods won't suffice. So I'll pause there and look forward to having a discussion later. But thanks so much for having me on the panel.
Thanks very much, Matt. Really interesting presentation there. I think you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. I was going to mention it if you hadn't, but I think that and sort of the EU response and whatever response we see from around the world is really sort of bringing us to a tipping point where we've been talking about sort of the skills that are required for this transition for a while, a few reports, saying how many, but it feels like now, the demand is really going to come and there's a gap there and we need sort of disruptors such as Greenworks to hopefully bridge that gap. So I'm sure there's lots of questions from the audience. Do pop them in the Q&A chat as they come to you guys, and we'll cover them as we can as we go. But I'll move on to our final sort of speaker, which is Nicola Waters. Nicola, So Nicola's Chief Operating Officer at Electron, and Electron is an energy tech company working to enable the flexible energy future system of the future. So they're providing a platform that will allow us to maximize the benefits of the revolution in data and digitalization that is happening in the sector. So Nicola, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully you can see the screen.
Yep.
Yeah, great. So I've taken a slightly different approach to Ellen and Matt, and I'm going to try and just give you a brief overview of what Electron does, because it's not always very clear, and electricity networks are very complex. So we're going to start there, if that's okay. Just a couple of slides. So as Phil said, we have a marketplace software tool, which enables flexible electricity grids. So what does that actually mean? Well, like all other infrastructure, the capacity that infrastructure have is definite. Like there is a definite end when it can be useful. So like mobile phone networks, you obviously need more masts, et cetera, to create more signal, and 4G expanding, just the same way that electricity is a finite life. Electricity networks have a finite life and a finite amount of capacity they can carry. When I say how much capacity they can carry, I mean physical power that can be transmitted down a cable, physical power that can be transmitted through a transformer, et cetera. So the only way to really expand these networks is to physically dig up roads and add copper, add wire, build these transformers, build these new networks. But obviously we can't do that at the rate that we need it for all the batteries and solar and wind and all those other great assets to connect. So how can we make better use of what we have today? And one of the ways we can make better use is with smart software. Distribution networks today are under huge pressure to start introducing like these smart ways to use capacity better. So this slide is talking to you about some of the regulation that's coming in here. So you can see there's something called RIIO-2 that's in the UK. So if you have a 5-year price regime in the UK, which tells network operators what they can spend money on, and it's approved by the regulator, has to be approved by the regulator, because essentially that then goes on to people's like yours and my bills. And then you've got government intervention looking at things like, okay, we've already mentioned IRA and Russian gas crisis, like actually people going, how do we get domestic energy security in our countries? But the more and more we increase renewables, the more and more lumpy and variable the supply on our network is going to be, because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and our electricity network isn't set up for that. It's not set up for that variable lumpy load. It's set up for that old school, huge industrial scale gas power plants, coal power plants, very predictable, not these types of loads. So you've also got the pressure coming from how people are changing their behavior. Matt talked a lot about it's about the people, and that's absolutely true. Lots of people are driving EVs, lots of people are changing the way they use electricity. So the network's getting pressured from both sides, and there's all this pressure on the network to figure out how do we better use what we've got today. So we have built a platform which enables markets to be completely configured in whatever way you want. And when I say a market, I mean something being traded with something, a unit of something being traded. So we enable trading of energy, trading of capacity, great trading of grid access, whatever that trade looks like. It can be done in forward time, it can be done in real time, it can be done in day ahead. Whatever the market configuration needs, our tool, you can able to configure those markets on that tool. And you've got lots and lots of companies across the UK today and across the world that are controlling assets that respond to these price signals. So essentially what our tool does is it sits in the middle and goes, okay, somebody needs something. Somebody needs access to the grid, somebody, a wind farm's getting turned off when actually that energy could be used by somebody very locally. Can the wind farm send out a price signal to say, I don't want to get turned off? Can somebody turn up their demand and use my energy today, right now, and get, either have really cheap energy or essentially in some cases even get paid to do that because the wind farm would rather have the opportunity to export onto the network. So all these different configurations of markets can be built on our tool to facilitate those trades. And once all of that trading happens, we have obviously very fancy wording here, holistic business intelligence for network planning and trading insights, basically data on what happened in the market, what are the other things that could have happened, what does that mean about somebody's network that they're running, what does it mean about assets that are potentially trading here, what are the trading strategies that people use, things like that. So we're actually being able to go back and improve the markets that we're running on behalf of people, or markets that people have come and built on our tool. I just wanted to simplify like the kind of market. So when you're thinking about markets and flexibility, we kind of go back to these 4 types of markets. So if you look down the vertical first, we have the concept of one to many. One person needs something, and then in order to get a solution, they have to trade with many people. So this could be network capacity constraint. So for example, there isn't enough power available there isn't enough capacity available in that cable for the power to get from A to B. So they have to some way reduce the capacity on that cable to facilitate actually people having access, or that the network itself not breaking. So that's maybe like the DNO or National Grid saying to lots and lots of people, look, I need you to turn down, or in some cases, I need you to turn up, produce more energy or use less energy. It's this concept of one person needing one thing and buying it from many people. They also have the same applies for energy. One person needs one thing from many people. But then the real growth in this sector comes from many to many people needing to trade with many others. I take the wind farm example again. You have wind farms all over the country that are curtailed. So curtailment means they get a signal from the grid saying you can no longer put your energy onto the network cannot take it, you have to switch off your wind farm. So rather than switch off the wind farm, they can send out a price signal, they set up a market and they can send out a price signal to say, I don't want to get switched off. Can somebody in this area please turn up your demand, use energy now that you otherwise would have used later when it's maybe from dirty power or more expensive power. Can you maybe turn up your demand right now so that I can stay connected, I can export my energy onto the network, and hey, everyone gets a better deal out of this. And often, because a wind farm's so big, it's not just one, it's not one individual person, it's assets and houses controlled by like Octopus, for example. Octopus controlling lots and lots of EV chargers, lots of devices in people's homes, responding automatically to those price signals. And in some cases, not even automatic. They know this stuff because the market's been configured on a day ahead basis. They know that's going to happen tomorrow, and they let their customers know, hey, use energy at this time, or hey, please don't use energy at this time. Right? It's this kind of concept of many people needing things from many others and how those trade, and everybody values the access to the network and the energy differently. And it's a similar thing to peer-to-peer. We haven't actually built, we haven't got an example case study for a peer-to-peer market. This is one that we're trying to build this year. That's me selling energy to somebody else or many other people. Like I've got solar on my roof in my village, maybe, my mother-in-law and her friends down the road buy it, that kind of thing. It's that concept of the actual trading of energy rather than capacity. So I hope that makes sense. It's relatively complex to get, but people will often say hydrogen's the answer for net zero, long duration batteries are the answer, reinforcement of the network's the answer, flexibility is the answer. But the reality of the situation is that there needs to be, they all complement each other and they all need to be deployed to some extent. And flexibility becomes more and more important the more renewables we get on because of the intermittency. And without flexibility, if you imagine a grid network that is never congested, it's not economically sane. That's like having an M25 that never has a traffic jam. Think how wide that M25 would need to be. It would be absolutely huge to never have a queue. It makes sense to have a queue, but to have other solutions there to solve it, like flexibility markets. And flexibility markets are super, super exciting because the regulations pushing for them now, and they also they can be deployed now. Like grid network reinforcement, that's 10-year game, right? Building large scale batteries, you're years away, right? We're still years and years away, and that's billions and billions of pounds. It's like 20 billion, I think, their forecast for batteries by 2025. I think it's like over 100 billion for network reinforcement. I mean, you can roll out a flexibility market, peer-to-peer market for a couple of 100K, right? So it's just like how these things could, the scale of this and the speed of this, back to Matt's point, speed and scale, this is really, really important technology to achieve net zero. And then I had done a slide, but it's not for some reason showing up. I think I've hidden it. So hopefully you can still see it like this. I did a slide on my career because it's not very traditional. I did engineering when I was at university. I was going to go straight into consulting and decided to not do that, I went, this guy that helped me with my dissertation was doing a PhD at the time at the university and was starting up a business. It was a room inside a warehouse. So when I arrived to work, it was dark, and when I left work, it was dark. I didn't see daylight for like 2 years, I don't think. But that was Evo Energy, and we grew that over a period of 3 years from basically nothing to 26 million in revenue annually. And I was in charge of, I think, about 90 people, and I was 25 years old, so it was a bit intense, but it was very, very exciting. And we sold that business to a construction business. I didn't want to always do business development. It's not where I planned my career to go. So in order to shift it, I did an MBA. At the same time, I joined SSE to get some experience in large project delivery. I didn't really fit in with SSE, to be honest. Like, I've really enjoyed startups, like the intensity and the speed of startups. So I didn't stay at SSE very long. One of the people that were on the board of Evo Energy, Giles Clark, he had contacted me. He's been on the board at Evo, very well respected in solar renewables in the UK. And he was setting up Primrose Solar with a fund called Pioneer. So I went to work with him, where we were given essentially £250 million to just go and build as much solar as we possibly could with a 3-year exit plan. That's what we did. And back then, that was a lot of solar. That was a crazy amount of solar. And I focused on building my personal network and building as much solar as I possibly could. And then from there, that's where everything took a bit of a turn. I decided I wanted to do a portfolio career. So I had various jobs, as you could see. And again, I was working still for the fund that funded funded Primrose. So I was doing like all these technical roles. I was working with National Grid as well and sitting on all the technical forums, because I believed that in order for people, investors, to understand what the network needed to understand what investors needed. And I really wanted to be in the middle of that, like the middle of that mess and that craziness, trying to figure it out. And one of the ways to do that was to run jobs in parallel. So I was doing a couple of days a week at each one and consulting until I found something I was really, really passionate about. And it was an opportunity, again, to make positive change. Push Energy had lots of different businesses, and one of their businesses was an O&M business, operations and maintenance business. So I'd built assets, had sold assets, had developed assets, had invested in assets. I wanted to run and operate them. So the CEO there said, yep, you can have the O&M business. Like, what's your plan? So I said, let's do a JV with another business, and we formed this thing called PSH. And at the time when we formed it, it was 2017, but it had 100 megawatts of assets, and now it's operating 1.7 gigawatts of assets in the UK. So it's like the largest solar provider in the UK. So we took it from nothing to market leader again. And whilst I was finishing that off and transitioning out of that role, I took the Electron job about 2 years ago, but I also only work at Electron 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I'm looking after this one who's just walked in. Brilliant. Sorry. Yeah, can I'm on the phone. Yeah, thank you. I'm on the phone. Can you please go? Sorry. I spend the rest of my time looking after Audrey, and I still do consulting for the fund Pioneer. And they've put me on lots and lots of interesting projects, data centers in Portugal, large infrastructure projects in Ireland, recycling plants in the UK. So yes, I've currently running, still having this portfolio career, but with a focus on through and through net zero, achieving the goals that Matt talked about. But yes, not very traditional. I'm sorry, but yes, there's no way to get rid of this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nicola. I think non-traditional is great because I think, a lot of people maybe see themselves as non-traditional, and to see sort of the route others have taken to successful positions via non-traditional routes, builds confidence. And I have to say, I think that entry from Audrey was almost choreographed, the timing.
Not so much the hair pull on the way out there. Sorry.
Great. Well, now obviously we've heard from all of our speakers some really interesting presentations. So we'll move to the Q&A session. I can see that some questions are already popping into the Q&A box, so please do keep them coming in. I think I'll just kick us off with a question straight back to you, Nicola, if that's okay. I think given sort of all the roles that you explained there, and obviously looking after Audrey, and you must be very busy. So I think you currently work for 2 startups. I think you were saying at the end there, and you're on the board of another. Can you give the audience some advice of how you manage your life with so many roles, and does it take over your life?
My husband's very supportive, first of all, but I think supreme weekly coordination. So we actually have a family meeting on a Saturday evening to decide the week ahead, what each of us are going to be doing and coordinating that. And I'm also really, really clear with everybody that I work for when I just can't be available, and I don't move those things. Otherwise, I feel like I do really badly at everything. We have an investor meeting this evening, for example, between 4 and 5, but I have Audrey at that time, and it's just very easy to be pressured into letting those boundaries slip. But otherwise I'll just work constantly. All I would do is work with all the different jobs that I have. So I think finding people that are willing to give you flexibility, not being afraid to ask for that flexibility, and then really sticking to it. And it also demonstrates such good behavior for other people that work for you in the business. If you're willing to have that and to do that the people that I work with now really thrive with flexibility, and just lots and lots of planning, but otherwise it would completely take over my life. And it's also very, very tempting to say yes to everything. Oh, can you sit on this board? Can you join this panel? Can you speak at this event? All these things. And one of the things I found really hard over the last couple of years certainly is saying no, but I'm getting better at it now.
Great, thanks, Nicola. Well, I'm glad you did say no to this one. We got over that first hurdle. Ellen, Matt, so you both, I guess, have come into this energy and sort of climate change sphere quite recently. I just wondered if you want to comment on sort of how you found that transition to a new sector, and any tips you might have for people in the audience that are either thinking of coming into the energy space or maybe moving to a slightly different sector.
Go ahead, Matt, you kick us off.
No, I was going to say you should go first, Ellen. But I guess, for me, how I found it, I think it's really important to maintain the freshness of an outsider mentality, because you're kind of solving your interpretation of one aspect of the problem. And actually, I'm really comfortable in the skills space, albeit it's kind of skills with a very specific kind of focus. And then on kind of building relationships in a new space. So I think sort of 2 thoughts. One is that you have to kind of make your existing networks really sweat. And, Phil, I met you through someone that had worked with me in my old, sort of criminal justice kind of niche. And you realize that actually lots of people know people who work in an energy company. A PA of someone that I used to work with knows a logistics manager in egg energy. That's quite helpful. And I'm sure there are now, however many people in this call. And the other, I think, is just humility that, half the time, I'm learning so much more through the conversation that I'm having with people, and it kind of helps me be more attuned to what they're saying and what their interpretation of this issue is. And you kind of get better over time. And so just comparing like my patter from summer till now, I feel incredibly more confident in, you know, retrofit conversations, for example, than I was when I was first learning what on earth retrofit is about. And I've put myself on various courses and stuff because you have to drink your own medicine too. So yeah, those would be my things.
I'll maybe just add that. I think I like, Matt, what you shared on sort of just, I think, continuing to active listen, even when you start to feel like you know something is important. I see this as sort of like twofold also, at least for me, as I was sort of getting into the space. There's both the kind of self-education that you do, so it's sort of like tops down work of actually trying to read as much as possible, see what piques your interest and go deep in the places that pique your interest. I think naturally going down different threads, you'll learn a lot. And also then I think as Matt shared, really tapping into meeting as many people as possible. There are a lot of kind of climate communities that exist in London, in the UK, online now, making that a lot easier. I think hearing other people speak and getting into those conversations and being in the back and forth of them was really where I felt I was sort of opening up my horizon and learning different perspectives. And I think to Matt's point, you know, there's ways of doing that, both kind of looking at climate companies and people that work specifically in energy, but the reality is with climate specifically, it's actually relevant to almost every company, and you're almost always finding people in organizations who are thinking about this problem. And so a lot of that for me was just talking to as many people as possible, hearing different perspectives, and being a very kind of active listener and asking lots of questions as we go. So both kind of self-education and just making sure you're kind of getting into the communities as much as possible.
Great, thanks both. I think a clear plug there for networking as well, and I think you both qualify as YEPs with less than 10 years experience. So we look forward to seeing you at all our future events. So we've got a question in the chat here for Nicola. So Nicola, this attendee is asking, how do you approach taking on huge challenges and the risks they may bring, such as moving into a startups or taking on very ambitious targets with your solar work? And I think, you know, generally all three of you have probably taken a leap of faith at some point in your career, and maybe just, you know, give the attendees an idea of the sort of decisions and the thinking behind those big leaps of faith and how you bring yourself to that point. Nicola, do you want to start?
So I think there's a difference between taking a leap of faith and it being a challenge. I think for me is, what do I want to get out of it? Every time I've taken on a role or created something, it's been, what do I want to learn? What do I enjoy? How do I enjoy spending my time? Rather than thinking about what money can I earn or what's the next thing? It's about enjoyment. So for me, actually going and working and starting various startups and doing this portfolio career now for the last sort of 8 years, it's really been, how do I get the most? How do I spend my time doing what I enjoy for the time that I do work? And therefore the risk feels quite low. Obviously there's always financial pressure, but we've also been, like, as a personal thing, you know, we haven't always chased like, oh, I'm going to move house into a bigger house, or I'm going to get a fancy car. Like, we have taken life decisions that mean that our cost of living is incredibly low, so that we can have the flexibility to do what we enjoy, you know, instead. And I think that's a really difficult decision to always make, and people, especially in the investment world, don't always understand that. You know, I say I don't fly and I go everywhere on my bike, and, you know, they think I'm crazy wearing Lycra to meetings, but it's just, that's the way I live my life, and I get to do all of these really great things, but having a really great time whilst I do it. So I think my message is, if you're doing something you enjoy, then, and you will learn and you'll be good at it. So it's therefore worth taking the risk, as whatever you perceive that to be.
I might, I think that's an awesome answer. And I might just add to it, I think in the enjoyment piece, in thinking about next steps in careers and things that are scary, the piece that I've sort of learned over the last 10 years of my career is it's also about the people. And if you're following great people, you're most likely going to really learn a lot. And a lot of that learning comes from the people that you are surrounded by. And that when you're taking those risks, or you're looking at a startup and you're worried about what's next, take a look at the people you're going to be surrounded by every day, because I think if they're people that you want to learn from, and if you think that you will enjoy that day to day with, it will be worth it no matter what. You will get something out of that experience. But ultimately, so much of our careers are about the people that we interact with, that we learn from, that sponsor us, that mentor us, that teach us. And so that would be the piece that I would say, just to kind of add on to everything that Nicola shared.
I'll throw out some jargon. I think Ellen, a quote I heard is that you're sort of the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with, and I've started thinking about that quite kind of arithmetically half the time, and right now I'm certainly on my toes. I think I have exactly a team of 5, and they certainly make me feel like I'm learning and like I'm inadequate in all manner of ways. So that's quite an admission. I suppose the other aspect is you kind of have to look for particular pivots. It's a bit like a New Year's resolution. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go to the gym, or I'm gonna cycle to work every day, or whatever. And you have to look for those moments where you can sort of do big jumps. And for me, it was kind of perma crisis meets midlife crisis, and sort of saying, hey, look, this is it. And what's the worst that can happen? Like, yeah, you fall on your backside, but you try to do something extremely hard. Something like 9 out of 10 startups fail. So the odds are absolutely against you. But as Nicola was kind of implying, you can always try and make some other change that just, yes, is a sort of, an adjustment. But you make it because you're pursuing something else that gives you joy. And I think there's nothing that sort of competes with that, because if you really, really care about it, you will win. There's no denying it. Even being an outsider in a sector where you're kind of, going on bravado and enthusiasm half the time, it really, really works because you care about it more than anyone, and you will work twice as hard as the next person because it matters to you that much more.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think some really fundamental tips there for YEPs as they're thinking about their careers. Go into a bit more of a technical question. So Nicola, we've got one in the chat here. So currently we have a TSO and the emerging role of DSOs. Do you see Electron and the platforms that you're creating as best used on the national or the regional scale? And I guess why, or both?
So yes, this person knows the UK electricity network. Excellent. You need both national and local markets. So national markets generally are, they're currently things like frequency. They are definitely like dipping their toe in local markets. If you look at the, again, the more technical B4, B6 constraint, which is between England and Scotland, how they manage that constraint, they're looking at market-based solutions, and that's typically wouldn't be in their remit, but they are so far ahead of where the DSOs need to be in terms of operationalizing these markets. DSOs, though, are now starting to think about this. There's lots of tenders coming out next year. There's lots of trials coming to a head. There's lots of innovation projects that are like all the learnings are now being published, which many Electron are doing with the DSOs. So they have to coordinate. The ENA, so Electricity Network Association, is working on the primacy rules, i.e. what takes precedent and when. So if you think about the concept of having what's an exclusive market, like what market can if you participate in that market, can't it participate in anything else? Then you've got what's a follower market. So if you participate in one market, which markets are allowed to follow, which market, and then the other way, which markets must you participate in before you can participate in this market? And all of those rules about how they all interact, they're all starting to be discussed and decisions will be made. But essentially, this tool that Electron has built is completely configurable. It doesn't matter if you're running national or local, because you're essentially still either buying capacity or access or energy, and you're either doing it on a day ahead, week ahead, 6 months ahead basis. It could be one to many, many to many, so it's completely configurable from our perspective.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks. I was, funnily enough, on an event just this morning. It was sort of a knowledge sharing between UK or GB DSOs and Hungarian DSOs, and they were really talking about focusing a lot on this flexibility first angle. A lot of talk around building more grid infrastructure, but there's this element of maxing out the infrastructure we have first, and obviously what you're doing in the platform and the markets, the local markets, are such a key enabler of that. Yeah,
the transmission network in the UK definitely needs to be reinforced. There's no way around that, but there is more that can be done to defer investment on distribution flex.
Interesting. Great. So we've got another question now from the audience. So some immediate feedback, which is good. So do you have advice for speaking so well at panel discussions like this? I'm in awe of the conversation flow and quality of discussion. Certainly something I'd like to improve on personally. Who would like to go first? Matt?
Thanks. Well, thank you for the compliment, whoever you are, anonymous questioner. But yeah, I think that the basic one is practice. But I certainly have never been one to practice in front of a mirror or sort of try and memorize lines or whatever. I think it's practice as in exposing yourself to more and more situations, particularly the ones where you're on a podium in a hall and there's like hundreds of people. Those are super scary because there is genuinely a kind of a physical kind of factor to it. And so panel events that are on Zoom feel much more routine. But that's my only advice. The more you do it, the more kind of natural it becomes, and then you take on board feedback about actually kind of rhetorical instruments and various other things. So yeah, that would be my, and yeah, watch other people do it. I think for me, if you haven't seen it, the Stanford commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave is like one of the most moving pieces of oratory ever, and it's all the inspiration you need for your career in terms of how you think about what you're spending your time doing as well. So it's really worth spending time observing as well.
Really interesting, Matt. Thanks. I wonder whether Ellen and Nicola have anything to add, and Matt, if you wouldn't mind maybe posting a link to that speech in the chat, I think people would appreciate that.
My only thing to add, I think Matt's right. I think you start in events that feel a little easier and less scary, and work your way to being on those big halls and stages, because those are intimidating, and I think they're always going to feel intimidating. One piece of advice was given to me, and this is especially if anonymous, thank you again for the compliment, but if you are starting to speak more, maybe for the company you work for or anything like that, is have a couple sound bites that you know really well, because you can kind of always come back to them. I was given this advice sort of earlier in my career when I was speaking on behalf of my old company quite a bit, and it was knowing a couple really good kind of customer examples in that particular case. But depending on what you do, maybe you don't work with customers, maybe you're more on the technical side, have one or two of your like key message sound bites that you really know, and don't over plan to kind of memorize your word for word, because you're going to trip yourself up, but know those sound bites pretty well, and you can always come back to them. And that advice, this is a little bit more informal, but if you're ever kind of on stage and you're presenting on behalf of a company, that was advice that was given to me that was very useful.
I might use that advice myself, Ellen, because you're good at done with that. So this week's been a weird week for me, because I normally shy away from these events completely, and I had to go to a government event on behalf of our CEO, and she'd been asked to ask a question. There was only 3 people in the room that were asking a question. I basically didn't even listen to anything anyone was saying, because I was so nervous about asking this question. And the first guy got up and he stood up to ask his question, and I was like, holy, I'm gonna have to stand up and ask the question. So that completely threw me. So even with like loads of practice, I still hate it. But I just try to remember that I'm still just a person, and everybody is still just a person. Everybody, like, don't be afraid to just talk and be yourself. You don't have to use big words or pretend to be something you're not. Just show up and just talk. And then the advice that I sometimes do, again, yesterday I was on a panel for the Energy Storage Network Association, and was much bigger than I anticipated it was going to be. I was very nervous. And I just thought to myself, what would I expect somebody in my shoes, in my role? How would I expect them to behave, and what I expect them to do? And it's like an element of fake it until you make it. It seems crazy, because I've been doing it for 15 years, but I still have to remind myself of that and get really nervous. So yeah, just don't hide who you like. Have personality, just be yourself. I think that's fine. The nerves never go. Well, certainly don't for me. And think about what somebody would do, what you'd expect, and then try and mimic that if you're absolutely nervous. But I'm going to use Ellen's soundbite thing. I'm going to use that next time. Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, thanks, all. Yeah, I think I'll use that one as well. And as someone who's less experienced in these things, I think one thing which I often find helps, an audience can seem sort of a big, scary audience, but if you break it down to the individuals and you imagine yourself in the audience, you always really want the speaker to do well, and you're always sort of on their side. So sometimes I find that helps. And also just sort of not taking things too seriously. So I was speaking at the Irish Renewable Summit a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think the phrase was, the UK needs to respond to the IRA. And then I realized I was in Dublin saying this and in front of like 200 people. But yeah, you just kind of have to laugh things off sometimes. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So we've got one in the chat here. So I think it's maybe targeted to Nicola, but if anyone else has done an MBA, do chip in. So how has doing an MBA benefited you? Do you think it's useful for an engineering career?
Sorry, Ellen, Matt, did you want to view? Okay. So yes, I think it was really beneficial because it allowed me to pivot from strategy and business development. So without having to first get a junior job, whereas I would have had to go into a junior delivery role, whereas I could say I focused my MBA on operations, so that actually just really helped me move. And I wanted to do business development, then I wanted to do ops, and now I'm like in, then did finance, and now like management. I wanted the full suite. Same with like the assets. I wanted to build assets, to invest in them, operate them, optimize them, and now flexibility market them, if that's the thing. But the whole full life cycle. So it was actually really useful for a pivot. And this has been said a number of times, but the network that you build, and as a socially awkward person, there's quite a lot of socially awkward people that do MBAs. It's great for me. So they take that into consideration because they have smaller groups, and they know that there's those types of personalities that do come to the MBA, and they profile you all before you typically go, so they know what kind of personality mixes you have. But I found that really useful way to practice networking, and I've still got some really great friends and some really great professional contacts from there. And Giles, again, one of my big kind of career supporters from Evo, went to LBS as well, so that just reinforced the network. There's all these, like, if I drew a network diagram of my career and my life, there'd be so much overlap. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Nicola. And then we've got another one straight back to you, a specific question. So another anonymous attendee is asking, how and when did you decide to follow the path of a portfolio career? Assume this would take great drive and ambition. And I think, knowing other people sort of in the sector that have a portfolio career, it seems that you've started this quite early on in your career compared to others.
Yeah, people think I'm younger than I am, which is always very pleased with that assumption. So as the question, when did I decide to follow a portfolio career? When I left Primrose, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. So I wanted to try a number of different things. And whilst I was trying a number of different things, I thought I could make this work as a lifestyle. And back to Phil's comment, I actually saw a lot of older people, I shouldn't use that word, a lot of people that are further in their career than me in terms of time, following this path, and thought, why can't this be a path? Why can't this be something that I can do now? And actually, the more I speak to people now, like friends that are about the same point as me now, they're all asking me the same question. That's what I want to do. I want to work 2 days a week here, 3 days a week here. And, you've got people doing 4-day weeks now. It frees up the extra day. You've got people more open to childcare responsibilities and all these things. So really, it was just a case of I wanted to see what was out there, then realizing I loved that way of working, and it exposes me to as long as I don't have any conflicts, I have to disclose all of my conflicts, all the different things I'm doing. But actually, the network that I'm building, for example, Electron, really helps PSH, where I'm still on the board. And it really helps Start Campus, where I'm on the board there, a big project in Portugal, which really helps. So everything kind of, it's again, like I've got my own little network and I'm building it. And so, yeah, I think if you're unsure, and if you can really be stringent about what you want and bring value, then I think it's a really great option for anyone.
Great, thanks, Nicola. So I think just coming into the last 5 minutes or so, we'll probably do one round on sort of the final question, although I'm going to kind of add 2 questions together. So maybe starting with Matt, what metrics do you use to sort of define your career and job satisfaction? Sort of have these changed over time? And then just any parting tips for the YEPs in the final comments.
Yeah, that's a really good and quite challenging question. I suppose there's one where you kind of look at personal metrics. How do I know that I'm having a good time? And the other is a kind of slightly bigger picture one. And I suppose personal would be, am I being challenged? And am I extracting kind of lessons, knowledge, growth? So yeah, you can track that, because discomfort is the way that you know that you're learning, and particularly when you've been expert in something for a while, doing something that unsettles you is probably a good thing. I think on a more kind of macro plane is trying to put your job in a sort of context, like if you unfortunately were to get a bad diagnosis tomorrow, what would you want to be doing kind of professionally in your last year of work, and what would you want your eulogy to say about that particular part? I hope obviously people say you're a nice kind of generous person, etc. But I do think about it in a very kind of sobering sense like that, because I think we only kind of have a limited time on the planet, and we have I do believe the kind of human talent is kind of, in some ways, is infinite. Potential is incredible as well, and so you kind of have to really maximize what you've got and really use it to sort of a better and bigger goal. So I don't know if that's too kind of trite or even obscure, but those would be my kind of two broad areas.
No, really interesting, I think. Ellen, would you like to, same question, sort of metrics you use, any parting tips?
I wish I had career metrics. I don't have career metrics, and I've never been someone who's been particularly good at telling you what I want to be in 10 years or what I want to be when I grow up. I think it's difficult to answer that question. I have kind of coalesced around sort of two things driving my career, and that is mission and people. I mentioned people already. I think for me, mission means am I proud of what I'm doing? Am I proud to talk about what I'm doing every day? It kind of comes back to Matt's point. And people is like, am I around people that I'm learning from and that I'm growing with and that are challenging me every day? I think for me, if both those boxes are ticked, I'm in the right place. If one of them isn't, then it's probably not the right place. You can be in a company that sounds really great and you're proud to talk about, but if it's not people who are challenging you, growing with you, creating opportunities for you, probably not the right place. And vice versa, if it's not something that you're proud of that you're doing, I think it's an opportunity to take a step back and ask yourself if you want to be doing something else. So that would be the vector I would sort of encourage people to kind of look at as they're making decisions. If you can check both of those, you're probably on the right path.
Thanks, Ellen. Nicola, anything to add?
I certainly live by Ellen's pride and learning, but I also have two others. Am I still having ideas? Like, am I coming to work with an idea every day? Like, oh, I still got to do this. I still want to do this. And this is like, oh, that's the way we can change that, that kind of passion element, like things to achieve here. And then the other one, obviously, you saw my daughter walk in, but do I actually want to spend time at work versus spending time with her? And if that decision at any point becomes no, okay, everyone has the tough days, but still asking yourself, like, week on week, if that answer was no, I'd know that wasn't the right job for me, because it has to be really something great that I'm doing to not be spending my time, exercising or being with her.
Yeah, really interesting last one. So we've got maybe one last one. It's a quick fire answer one. So very simple question to all of you. We'll do the same order. Matt first. So do the panelists believe we'll get to net zero by 2050?
Hard, but yes, I absolutely believe that.
Great. Ellen?
Yes, but we need a lot of things to happen, which is why we're all doing what we're doing.
Nicola?
Very controversial. No, I don't think we will. I think we'll be making good headway, but we won't actually believe. I don't think we'll get to net zero by 2050. But Electron is one of those companies that can make the difference, and we are hiring a lot of people. So if people are interested in these kind of like mission-driven businesses, then please visit our website, drop me a LinkedIn message, and be part of that. But sorry, no.
No problem. 2-1. I'd say I'm probably on the same side as Nicola, although I think it is exactly companies like Electron. It's these sort of, and Greenworks and Watershed, the innovators, the disruptors that might sort of move the dial and push us there, accelerate the transition. So that brings us to the end of the event this evening. It has been recorded, so if you found it useful and you want to share it with any,
can you edit out the hair pull?
If you want to share it with any colleagues or friends, then we'll be circulating the link in the coming days. So I just want to thank our three great speakers for lending us your time this evening and providing so much food for thought for the YEPs. Thanks also to Rob and the team at Energy UK, who put all the work in behind the scenes to make this happen. There he is. And finally, thanks to those of you that you're giving up your time to join us and ask so many insightful questions. Keep an eye out for our upcoming events, as I said. And other than that, have a nice rest of your evening and hope we see you soon.
Thank you,
Thanks
Phil.
for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Rob.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.